Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the, is it March the 19th Vision Committee meeting? And Ryan, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Denny.
Here.
Councilmember Maloney.
Here.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Here.
Councilmember Stein, absent. Councilmember Tracy.
Here.
Councilmember Worthington.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hammert.
Here.
And Mayor Troutman.
Here. And this evening, we're going to talk about stormwater rates, and it's such a popular discussion that, that maybe we should have talked other things. But so I think the appropriate things, Glenn or Leo, who would like to start off?
I can
Leo?
get us going.
Okay.
All right, good evening. Thank you for having us here tonight. We're here today to follow up on a couple of previous discussions we had, mostly related back to discussion we had in June of 2024 and the potential change in the methodology of the stormwater rates and just how they're assessed across town and some changes and if we want to go forward with that. So we've got a kind of proposal of next steps to talk about when we get there. So some very similar presentation the last time. Do a real brief overview of the history, MS4 permits, and then get down to our rate study. We've covered this before. This is kind of the history of the MS4 program that came to be. Big highlights are kind of that the city was issued their first permit in 2003 as a result of the phase 2 part of the program that applied to all the smaller communities across the United States. And then in 2004, the city created their stormwater utility kind of in response to those unfunded mandates and all the requirements that came along with that permit when it was issued to the city.
Could I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
I've tried to Google this, and of course, Google never lies, right?
Once in a while.
So what is the threshold for smaller cities? Because I know several towns that don't have this at all.
Yeah, there's two ways the EPA defines it for small communities. One is if you're over 50,000 population and within a recognized urban boundary, which we are neither of those.
Yeah.
The other way is if you're over 10,000 population and have greater than 1,000 population per square mile density in a non-urbanized area, which we do meet that requirement. 17,000 residents-ish, and we're about 12 and a half square miles. So I think I took a look. There's a few other communities that kind of fall into that boat. Montrose, Steamboat Springs, Durango, they kind of fit in that same window for permit requirements that we do in Colorado.
Well, that clears it up because it kept coming up that urban influence areas of 50,000 or more, and I know we're not.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, in our numbers, would they? Of course, it doesn't matter that the prison is there with 10,000 offenders. It doesn't matter. It still would categorize us because of the acreage.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
We fit that criteria.
And
Okay.
just to note that most of those offenders are in the territory or in the complex that are outside of the city limits, so they're not counted. It would only be offenders in Old Max that would count towards that population total.
Okay. Well, that's not real offensive. Go ahead.
Yep. All right, so real quick, these are the kind of 6 components that come out of having an MS4 permit. We do public education and outreach. We go to events. We hand out flyers. We try to keep the public informed of good water quality, managing the stormwater, things like that. We do public participation involvement, which is this meeting today. Give the public opportunity to engage with us on how we manage these things. Illicit discharge doesn't come up a lot. That's kind of where we get spills and accidents and things that happen around town. We're responsible to kind of track those, report them, investigate, follow up on those. Construction site runoff does come up a fair amount. Usually applies to sites that are over an acre in area. We have to issue permits and monitor those to make sure there's no runoff. Post-construction runoff control is probably one of the bigger ones. That's all of the permanent water quality features that are built around town. So everybody that has a detention basin or underground storage, whatever it may be, we have to keep track of those, make sure they're inspected, make sure they're kept up, those kind of things. And then last one is just pollution prevention and good housekeeping. That's a lot of us setting a good example with our own properties, making sure we're being good stewards with all the pieces that we control ourselves. City Hall, all our DPW buildings, things of that nature. So we mentioned real quick, The stormwater utility is defined in the same section of code as the water utility. All of it's contained in Title 13. Stormwater utility is specifically 1310. As noted, it was created right after the MS4 permit, and it was made really to, best I can tell, to create kind of a dedicated and accountable funding stream to address all those requirements. We've talked before the financial consequences. Colorado Springs was sued by the EPA for kind of not doing what they're supposed to do within their MS4 and ended up with whatever they ended up with through the federal government for that. And really it's trying to if you read Title 13, it has some excerpts that talk about how everyone benefits from the city having a good stormwater system. Whether your site creates runoff or not, everyone in the city benefits from making sure the streets drain and that we're not polluting the Arkansas River and things of that nature. So getting up to the real point of today's discussion, this is a high-level summary of what we presented back in June for potential revisions to Title 13. Right now, we track all residential parcels based on the amount of impervious surface area. Residential parcels, I think, represent about 80 to 90% of all the parcels we track in town. It's, I think, somewhere north of 8,000 parcels in total. We are not able to do a good job of it. There's no two ways around that. There's parcels that probably have never been updated since 2004. If you do work on your property to add impervious area, like pave a gravel driveway, none of that shows up. We don't get permits. There's no way for us to know about that unless we see it and catch it and go out and do something about it. So we've talked about kind of mimicking what some other communities do and just going to a flat rate for residential parcels, or some places have a tiered rate where it's based on the size of your lot. So, maybe a half-acre lot is one rate, a 1 acre lot's another rate, so on and so forth. The other part of that was looking at a way to potentially have a discount program for our non-residential parcels. So many of our non-residential parcels have stormwater features on them that they're responsible to actively take care of and maintain, that provide benefit to our system and to the water quality and help us meet our MS4 requirements. And many don't. And right now, the fees are tracked solely based on how much impervious surface you have. So trying to recognize the distinction in how some of those parcels are treated was part of what we're trying to get at. All of these things, we're really looking at doing them without changing the total amount generated was kind of our intent at this time. We do not have a unified stormwater master plan, I'll call it, like what the water fund just went through and created. We've got a lot of small scattered plans that don't talk to each other and say different things about different parts of town and don't have any sense of how you would prioritize the goals between those. So without that, it's kind of hard to say, what do we want to accomplish in the next 10 years? Because this plan says this, and this plan says that, and this plan says this, and which one do we want to follow? So with that in mind, I think we would propose to really keep the rates the same until we can create some kind of unified plan, which is definitely a goal we're working on. I know Brandy has been looking at the same grant program that we used for the water fund to do that, and that we budgeted some money within the stormwater fund to match that if we're able to be successful. But at this time, we just don't have a real great trajectory of all the things we want to accomplish, like in a city-wide sense, and how those rank with each other. So I think I included the proposal that was provided by Raftalis in the packet, so you all should have a copy of that. This proposal is to do a rate study that would look at those changes, would look at the changes to the residential parcels, switching to a flat rate, and would look at the change to create a discount program. I would say Raftalis has a lot of experience with this. They've done the water master plan. They've worked, the water rate study that's, I think, still underway, which would be working with nearly the exact same data set, a little bit smaller since this would only pertain to city residents as opposed to district-wide residents. And they've also were the company that completed the last stormwater rate study in 2017. Looking at the cost of the proposal, as presented, I believe it was $39,000 for the rate study. That's pretty comparable to what we paid for the water rate study. I believe that one was about $50,000, so a little bit bigger area, a little bit broader, more types of customer classes and things like that. We do have budget available for this proposal if we choose to move forward within the contracted services line item of the stormwater fund. So just really hitting on the goals again. The goals of what we laid out for potential changes are kind of highlighted in task 5 of what Raphtalis has in their proposal, where they would look at those switching to flat rates and discount programs and keeping the revenue for operations and maintenance in the fund sort of static at this time until we can do that master plan. I presented this just as I received it. A couple of things that I would point out just from my own perspective. Since we don't have that unified master plan, I think a lot of what they are proposing in task number 3, which is the stormwater impact fee that's assessed against new developments in town to kind of fund those large capital projects, is probably not something that's worth looking at right now without a defined list of what capital projects we want to achieve. It's hard to set a rate for that. Kind of the same for task 4, which is a 10-year spending plan. I mean, without a outlined 10-year goal, it's kind of hard to lay out what we want that spending to be right now. I would also point out, I think we had a real quick discussion on Monday. Task 5 does not include any sort of transition planning. I think that came up in the water plan of, you know, if these are real drastic changes, do we want to have them provide us a 3-year transition to make those changes or some recommendation like that. I think that came up as a potential extra cost on the water. So if it is something we wanted to move forward with and that was important, we could have that added to the proposal before we actually brought it back for consideration. And then I guess the last thing I wanted to say was if we decide to move forward with this and think this is a good route, the outcome of this would really be probably about 4 months from now, we'd have the full rate study from them, and we'd be looking to redraft that ordinance to kind of incorporate those changes, which would be a staff and legal counsel process to get through that. So that's a lot.
I read this and I highlighted a few things, is that what would, we want to do a study, what would change from 2017?
2017 was still based on the impervious surface measurements, so they would look at all of the residential parcels and decide how to split those in tiers and decide what the appropriate equitable flat rate for everybody would be.
You don't think it's equitable now?
I think it is equitable now. It's just a lot of data to manage, and
Well, and plus they can't update.
we're not able to keep up with
They're
it,
not been able to update the study of the individual parcels to see how much, impervious surface they have.
I definitely, impervious surface is equitable area. It's just a lot of data to manage and keep up with
And
as
they're
it
gonna-
changes.
And I think we've also received direction from council to look at other ways to assess these fees, and that's what, what's being proposed tonight is another way to look at the fees and how they're
In
assessed.
stormwater, what, is it a $4 million a year thing for us?
I think it's about $2 to $2.5 million
Isn't
in
it?
revenue that's generated annually from it. Yeah.
I would add that even if we move to a tiered or flat tiered rate, in a way, it's still based on impervious area, but it's looking at, say, residential lots of a certain size have a average impervious area of such and such, and other lots of a certain size have this kind of average. So it's still somewhat based on impervious area. It's just we will no longer have to go out and physically map changes, go visit sites. It's based on an average.
And you're suggesting okay, an average of what? What you think it might be?
They would look at all the residential parcels and break them into those categories and say, here's all the parcels under a half acre. This is the average impervious surface area for all those parcels. This is what a fee for that would be if you used your current rate. kind of thing, and then set that as a flat rate for all those parcels
Does that,
essentially.
does that include the rooftop and all that's impervious is?
Yep,
Yes.
does.
Okay.
So impervious areas, all of your building rooftops, pavement, like driveways, sidewalks within the parcel boundary, you know, gazebos, pools, anything that is a hard surface.
Who? You didn't push your button.
Are you doing
John.
buttons today?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, this is not the first time that the council has been dealing with this issue. And when I first came on council, one of the things that struck me is that we were dealing with two separate issues here. We were dealing with permitting, quality type issues, and we are dealing with stormwater runoff quantity type issues. And to me, it seems, it seemed productive to keep that in mind when we were trying to, talk about all these complexities that we get in here. But so one way to ask that is, if we did not have our stormwater permit, what would we be doing?
With this fund specifically? Yeah, we would be using the fund to maintain all of our underground piping, all our storm sewers. We pay for a portion of our street sweeping from this to keep that debris from ending up in our storm sewers. We pay to maintain several of the city-owned detention facilities for flood control around town, and the city is responsible for maintenance of several of the main drainage way channels in town.
So the bottom line is, we're still gonna have to spend money, and this is a way to fund that. That's really what we're dealing with here. But there's really not any quality issues. If we didn't have that permit, we still have the quantity problem we have, some pretty big drainages. We have, our various agricultural ditches in town that are concerned about the stormwater that comes into their ditches that they then
Yep.
get to manage for us, essentially. But so it's, so we're really kind of more on the quantity side with this whole discussion and trying to find a way to equitably charge our citizens to fund those necessary things.
Yeah, I would say that's reasonable.
And so we would, even if we didn't have the stormwater permit, we'd still be doing this.
Right.
There's definitely still obligations that are, things that we would want to invest money in to take care of, whether we had a permit or not.
But then if you overlay the permit requirements on top of that, there are programs we have to run, there's inspections we have to make, there's personnel that we have to hire, to do all those things. And so there is a cost for the permit that this also funds. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yep, I would say so.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, Tim.
Good evening. I have a question because this is brought up by most of my neighbors who live on Baldwin Avenue. Baldwin Avenue is a one-way or dead-end street. Flows from east to west. It exits on east, or on the west side of town. The water all flows east. And this is what my neighbors and that say. And I'll be honest, I probably get the brunt of it because most of that street water and all this rainwater and coming off the impervious surfaces ends up in my yard. Yes, the street department, we've tried to build it up, nothing. And this is where my neighbors get so mad because they're saying, why am I having to pay for this? Because everything's just running off into our yards. I'm just letting you know, it's something that we really need to be aware of because the water is not going anywhere off our street other than back into neighbors' yards or, people's street, and we live on a dirt road, so then we're getting the dirt with the mag chloride going into everybody's yards. And I'm just saying, you gotta be aware of this. If you're gonna charge people for this, especially on a street like this, you better make sure that the water's not going like this. I have a problem with it, but believe me, I've heard it from my neighbors too, and I think that's something we need to look at different parts of town. I'm sure a lot of the paved streets and all that don't have that problem, or maybe they do have it depending on which way the flow is on the street. My flow is completely different. It does not flow out. It flows down into at the end of the street where there's houses. my neighbor next door to me who lives in the county, my fence line is county line, he gets a brunt of water in his yard coming back down the street because of the grade of the road. I think it's something that we really need to look at. If we're gonna charge people, make sure that there's a reason why they're getting charged. Thanks.
Amy?
Thank you.
Sorry, did I interrupt? Amy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Troutman. Thanks so much for kind of going through your analysis of the Raftellus proposal, Director Evans. It was really great to hear that you don't think that tasks 3 and 4 are appropriate at this time. I am wondering, why do we need this study? Like, what is their value add? Why is this not something that we can do in-house? If it's as simple as looking at what a tiered structure would be, we obviously do the analysis already, or try to do the analysis already of all of those residential parcels. Why do we need to pay 40 grand to some company to do this?
Don't know that I can answer that all the way. I would say that to make a change to our title and have these rates be defensible and equitable and appropriate, we kind of felt that it was best to have a professional do that rather than us averaging a spreadsheet out and saying, this is what it would be.
I think.
But when you take out tasks 3 and 4, that's where it appears to me, at least, that a great deal of the expertise is actually required. When you're looking at task 1, which is just setting up the project and talking to us, task 2, which is looking at what the parcels are, which is what we already do, task 6, which is presentations to us, like why do we need to pay somebody to do that work?
Yeah, I think as Director Evans said, having a third party that, specializes in rate structures and doing this type of work is important, mostly because we have taken out debts to do some of these stormwater projects, and we have fiduciary responsibilities to the people who hold those bonds, and having a third party as being an extra check in the checks and balances of making sure that we are designing the rate structure appropriately.
So I think that's my second question. How do we measure, and it kind of goes to some of what Preston and John and Tim, I think we're all talking about, how do we measure the efficacy or the success of our stormwater program? How do we actually know that we are being good fiduciaries of these funds? Like, what metrics do we use to ascertain if the funds that we are collecting are actually being used appropriately?
We do quite a bit in Cartograph, which is our asset management software to track where our operations crews spend most of their time. We have a 2-person operation team that is probably 75 to 90% of their job is handling these issues. So all of their time and work and effort is tracked in that regard.
Oh, I completely understand that that our folks are working hard and that they're doing good work. But what I hear us tracking are the inputs. Right? So like what we're actually spending the money on. We're spending it on these 2 people's salaries, on the infrastructure, on the stuff that we're buying. How are we tracking the outcomes of the work that they're doing? How do we actually make sure that the mag chloride isn't flowing into people's lawns? How do we actually make sure that the flooding isn't happening? How do we actually make sure that our stormwater program is having the impact, is having the outcome that we desire it to have?
I think we do, probably not to the same degree as we track the inputs, as you said. We do keep track of all our flooding instances, where we have problem areas. Have they gotten worse? Have they gotten better? But it's definitely less formal in that regard right now. I think a master plan would be something that would give us a lot better metrics to track along the way of if we're hitting those goals and what those goals are. But
Do you have that information that could be given to council?
it's not consolidated in one place, I would say. It's, it's location specific. Hey, we've had 10 flood complaints at this property in the last 15 years. Has the rate gone down? Has it gone up? Have the complaints been the same, worse, better, that type of thing?
So we don't necessarily know overall, since the inception of our stormwater program, if it's been successful or not.
I would leave that to the people that have probably lived here for the 20 years, for their lived experience would probably be the ones to best speak to it. But I don't know that we have a document that measures it that way right now.
Thank you.
I will say that complaints are tracked, any that I take or that I'm made aware of, and are mapped. Usually do a yearly map. When we switched to Cartograph in 2019, I lost some of my data from before that. But we have the ability to track what types of complaints we're getting, if there's clusters. A lot of the complaints, you know, they take some planning and some money, and that's where Leo gets to make the decisions. As far as the stormwater permit requirements, all of my tasks, all the tasks associated with those requirements are tracked in Cartograph. The hours, the amount was spent on them, what types of activities are done, all of that. And my annual report at the end has a whole breakdown of costs and everything on that.
Yeah, I would also say that, you know, some of the outputs are the projects that we have identified through the complaints that we've received. So doing the projects up in Dawson Ranch with the culvert project, they've led to us identifying broken stormwater systems that have been replaced over the years, or broken pieces in the system for new pipes and things like that. So I think a lot of it leads to some of those capital projects that we've done over the years.
Emily?
Yeah, and I do have a specific question about tasks 3 and 4, but I just kind of wanted to add to that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection from previous discussions is that we collectively acknowledge we don't really have enough money to do all the infrastructure that we need in the city for stormwater. So to Councilmember Schmischer's question, it seems like success maybe isn't the right word. Are we achieving what we hope to achieve in the areas where we have made those improvements, knowing that we're not done by any means with that infrastructure? Is that a fair statement, that we just don't have the revenue to do that?
Yeah, I think I can't remember if it was 2017 or 2019 when they had a task force that prioritized those projects we did. I think they had identified $200 million worth of need around the city. We were able to bond and fund, I think it was $8 million of that, so we got a piece of it, but I think there was recognition, there's a lot. The other thing that I guess comes to mind for me is, we do have to maintain our permit. I can measure that as a success. I don't think we've ever had violation notices or any issues with our permit. We've been in good standing all times, no threats of lawsuits that I'm aware of or anything of that nature for us, so that's one other thing I would highlight.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing to highlight. Absolutely. I do think it is important, though, and cognizant of the point that Councilwoman Tracy made. We obviously don't have $200 million to spend towards stormwater, but if we are going to bond $8 million, what actual outcomes, what actual impact are we hoping to achieve with that $8 million? And then measuring, are we actually achieving that? I think is a really important thing to do.
Okay, John?
I didn't get to ask my
Oh,
other, you
I'm
can
sorry.
come back to me if you want, but.
No,
I
no,
did
no,
have-
Emily, go right ahead. I didn't cut you off.
I wanted to just have Leo go a little further into that task 3 and 4 thing. I want to make sure that I understand. Are you saying that we're taking those out of the proposal, or we're modifying those in some way?
I think my recommendation would be that task 3 certainly comes out of the proposal. That is assessing impact fees on new development. The way our title is set up right now, the rates that are paid by regular monthly customers cover what we classify as operation and maintenance. So it's keeping our permit, taking care of our system, rebuilding the existing things that we have. But the impact fees are geared towards those big capital projects that we're going to need as we continue to grow as a city, to make sure we're not flooding areas and draining streets that we need to. So I don't know that there's benefit to doing that at this point in time without a prioritized list of what those projects are and what we want to accomplish in a certain time frame.
And
Okay.
so does that mean if we take 3 out completely, and I'm not sure about 4, does that change what the cost should be or not?
Yeah, that would, I think, I'd have to look, I think one of the latter pages, they are kind of broken down, cost per task. So that,
Yes.
task 3 is one of the more expensive ones at a little over $9,000. So it would be something we would certainly push back to Raftellus and say, hey, we don't think this is the time to do that. Are there still components of task 3 that are important to be done for the rest of the work, or can it be eliminated altogether?
So you would look at that on that digital page 8 or whatever near the end, as you mentioned, you would be talking with them about taking out that line item for 3 and that dollar amount for 3.
Yeah, I think if that's kind of the direction we want to go as a board, that would
Gotcha.
be what I would take back to Raftellus when we formally brought this proposal back for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm
Thank you,
done.
Kathy. Thank you.
As a resident of Dawson Ranch and also being on the homeowners board, I would say that based on the reaction of most of the residents in the $1 million of the $8 million that was spent in Dawson Ranch has made a huge difference. Right now, I think we have, 7 or 8 houses that are being worked on right now because of stormwater having eroded their property. And with new design and everything that way, good amount of money is being spent up there right now to mitigate property rights and property lines. So that's making a big impact too on storm drainage. So we're very appreciative of what's been done up there.
Amy?
Thank you. And thanks so much for sharing that, Council Member Worthington. I think that raises another important consideration from my perspective, which is if we are going to pay for a study, which I'm still not convinced that we need to pay for, but if we are going to pay for a study and we are not going to be able to afford all of the stormwater work that is needed, and we are going to prioritize certain neighborhoods over others, should those neighborhoods have to pay more? And should that be put into the tier structure or not? To Councilmember Dennehy's point earlier, if your property is actually being damaged by other people's stormwater and yet you are having to pay into stormwater, certainly it benefits everyone when it comes to keeping dangerous substances out of the Arkansas, but should you really have to be paying into a stormwater program that is not actually benefiting you if we know that we are not able to actually meet all of the stormwater needs in our community?
Well, you might as well then not pay your house insurance if you don't have any issues with your house. What I guess I'm saying is that we're in this together. I think we're in this as a community. And we're sort of getting with a stormwater fee, we're paying insurance that at least a good portion of the city is being taken care of. Even up in Dawson, a lot more needs to be done than what has been done to this point. And that's the developer's fault, which is 25 years down the road. So I guess what you're saying is that perhaps those of us who are now living up there, and because it was not necessarily designed correctly at that time, we should have to pay more because you maybe don't need it at your house? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
No, I think my point is similar to the water rate study. One of the things that we're considering is the water that needs to be, people whose water needs to be pumped to them should perhaps have to pay additional funding to have that water pumped to them. So if you are living in an area that requires additional work, is that something that should be taken into consideration or not? I'm not saying whether or not it is. I'm saying if we are going to have a rate study and it looks at impervious surface as a potential impact, are there other types of impacts that also need to be looked at?
Okay,
I
John.
would say we do, similar to pump zones in the water district, the stormwater is classified by basins. So each basin has a defined capital need of, what are the capital needs identified in each of those basins. So it's something that could be looked at. In my first blush reaction, it's probably something that would be better looked at while you were doing the master plan and you updated all those capital needs and prioritized them and ranked them and, could differentiate them. I also don't know that I've seen any other communities that have structured it that way, so it may be something from a legal perspective that we aren't allowed to do that. Pump zones are very well defined to, you know, the electricity and the pump house and the needs to move that water up a hill. I don't know if there'd be any legal issues in doing that. We'd have to look at probably.
John?
Thanks.
In terms of metrics, you know, being able to look at you know, how is it working? From my perspective, you know, as having been a resident since 2005, when it used to rain, there would be flooding everywhere. There'd be water standing almost in every street, at least around my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But now, the water is flowing so fast in the drains, it's making a huge sucking sound, you know? So it's real, from what I have observed, the quantity problem has been lessened a whole lot, specifically by our vacuum truck. I mean, and plus other repairs that we've been doing where we're cleaning out the stormwater drains. Plus, there was other flooding down by City Market that would happen almost every time it rained,
And farther east.
haven't seen that. So it's a little bit hard. It's kind of like the dog that doesn't bark or something, you know. There's an absence of complaints about all the flooding that's going down around. And so how do you measure that? You know, it's a little bit hard. I mean, I'm just saying it gets to be a little bit qualitative when you're trying to.
Sure, qualitative, but I think that we can do better than anecdotal. And it sounds like we have the data, we just maybe haven't actually consolidated it or put it into a data visualization format so that folks can actually see the impact, particularly perhaps for those who have moved here more recently. So I think in the same way with 2A, like we've actually done a lot of work and have made a lot of forward progress and improvements, but until you can actually show that, all it is are anecdotal stories.
Plus the other issue that we're dealing with or not dealing with here tonight is really the elephant in the room.
Right.
Which is the agricultural ditches, because they've been threatening to sue us
There's another
for quite a long time. And that is where we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, you know, $200 million to fix their problem that they perceive. And that's controversial because, you know, before there was a city, there was water running into those agricultural ditches from runoff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's but that is really the elephant in the room, and that's part of what we're doing is trying to avoid that lawsuit and make things better for the ditches where they're get to more of a accepting stance.
Okay, Emily?
Yeah, just to add, I'm thinking there might be at least two elephants in the room. The other one being properties outside of our boundaries, the city boundaries. That, you know, we've talked about how those in unincorporated areas contribute to the issue that we deal with. There's not a solution there, I don't think. But it's just, I think for me, the bigger picture is that it's a very complex, interrelated drainage floodplain type system. And there isn't a perfect solution. I think we can't, on the one hand, decide we want to get away from having to measure impervious surface on every lot in town, but at the same time, try to add more data collection and make it more complicated. So I kind of like the direction that we're suggesting here. I did want to ask, because I don't remember, I know part of the problem in the past, and I'm talking past decades, particularly that East Canyon floodplain, we just didn't have infrastructure at all to handle that. But I think that's partially done now. Am I remembering that right, as far as funneling that to the river ultimately?
Yeah, the Abbey Basin will be done when we can finish that Rhodes Avenue project. That'll be one of the basins that did not have kind of a direct dedicated route to the river.
Yeah.
The Orchard Avenue Basin is kind of the one that would be just to the west of that. That's kind of one of our other big problem children, that we have a big detention basin. It's in the county, right, Glenda?
Yes.
It's just outside of the city limits to the north that we own, we maintain. There is no path that takes that water to the river. Large amount of it enters the ditch, right where the ditch crosses Orchard Avenue. There's a pretty good floodplain that follows down Orchard Avenue. Lots of houses are considered in a floodplain because there is no channel for that water.
So I think that's important to recognize that these issues are bigger than just saying, well, here's a neighborhood that's got more problems, so we should charge them more. I think it's really system issues and floodplain issues and infrastructure that we don't quite have yet. Some of it, obviously, we're working on and hope to get it done someday. But so I like the direction that's being suggested here, so.
Okay, well, we've covered 2 elephants in the room and a sucking sound, kind of like my checking account. So
A lot going on.
this has kind of been fun. What I've always, in all the years I've done this, and it's approaching a lot of years, is that we are tasked with, and rightfully so probably, I don't like this, but that's the way it is. We are tasked with handling the county's water that flows, not the county, not Fremont County as a legislative body. The water that flows from us, we got to do something with it, and that's our burden, and I think that's unfair, and I believe that a legislature, was the federal government or the state government that has set up all this stuff, they should help us and back us up by making something that says, hey, look, Canyon City's taking care of this, you've got to do something as well, whether that's cofferdams, even an acknowledgement that this occurs. I think that's not going to make my friends on the commissioners happy, but we're taking care of the stuff that flows from a huge basin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many cases, the basins that end up draining through Canyon City have more acreage outside of the city limits than they do inside of the city limits.
Oh, yeah, I've seen maps of that, and I think it's great. But on the other hand, they should help us out by acknowledging that we burdened you with it, but it is larger than just that. And that could be simple things like cofferdams or slow it down. That's really the big part, I think, is what we're after. Slow it down,
Detention.
bleed it out, detention. That could be a simple task, I think. So that's my commentary. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I think my one other question, I am still not convinced that we need to pay an external expert to do this, but I do, I guess, want to make sure that we as council are still in favor of this potential tier structure, because the last thing I would want to do is pay, if it's 30,000 or whatever it ends up being, and then have council vote it down, because we don't actually want to go with this tier structure. So I guess
Is that the meat of the study that we're talking about? Do you want to run over these points, the cost to them, and see what everybody has the knee-jerk reaction? I'll have to find my glasses here. Okay.
Are you
So-
looking at the individual tasks on there?
Yeah,
or-
it says fee,
Yep.
and that's what we're talking about, an expenditure of project initiation and management. That's okay with, I mean, I'm going to mention them, and you give me feedback. Customer parcel and impervious analysis. Impact fees.
What kind of feedback are you looking for, Mr.?
Whether we think we should have that in there or at all, or we maybe don't discuss it and say, yeah, let's do the program. But Amy has a concern that maybe some of the stuff we don't need that we have in-house. Is that right?
No, my concern is that this essentially will give us a new way to charge people stormwater. A new rate design would be the end product. So I would want to make sure that council actually is in favor
Oh,
of that new rate
got it.
design before we decide to spend 30 grand on a study.
So I think the question is, do you want to move away from impervious surface, at least on a residential standpoint, and go to this tiered format that would have to be designed through this process?
And to me, the really the big point about that is that with impervious surface, we can't support that measurement. Well, it's just impossible for us to, as we're currently configured and staffed, we cannot support that, a timely analysis of impervious surface on every parcel in the city, on any reasonable, annual or every other year or even 5-year basis. We can't do it. So because of that, we're getting away from the defensibility of the impervious surface analysis. The real bottom line is there's no real true equitable way to do this. There's always going to be somebody that comes in and says, well, but, you know, I've got 20 acres and I never see a drop of water leaving my property when it rains, you know, and we've heard those from citizens. So there's not going to be an equitable basis, but the way that we're doing it right now is definitely not defensible. And so this is a way to try to get something defensible.
Is that the way you see it, Amy?
It absolutely is. I just didn't know if a majority of council concurred with that or not. It is the way that I see it, though.
So you think we wouldn't agree with you? No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
It's happened before.
It's happened before. What is the play? Do you think, can we just have a thumbs up or a discussion on that, that we're,
I would say that we should, you know, in the thumbs up, we should include the idea that Leo will try to cut down the scope where appropriate. If there's things we're not going to need or are not relevant to us, that there be a critical eye be taken to the amount we're going to spend, if you can do that.
We can do that.
okay, so then we're in favor of this bid of the $39,000 with the
We'll come back
We'll
with
come
something
back with a
adjusted.
revision.
adjusted.
It'll be
Okay.
an adjusted amount.
Yeah.
Taking out task 3, maybe
Okay.
some other adjustments.
Good.
And I think, Leo, if we could put something in where we have an off-ramp if it looks like the rate design is not gonna, might have some feasibility issues.
We can call it off.
Yeah.
Is that how this set up, Leo, is we get an incremental feedback so that,
We can build something into it, maybe at one of the preliminary tasks where we kind of do a
Okay.
gut check on it and make sure that we're all still on board. I think they have it set up in here to attend 2 public meetings, so maybe
Yes.
at that first meeting, we're like, hey, if this
Yeah.
is a hard no-go for us, we're
Okay.
just gonna stop right there.
okay. So that's the pleasure of council at this time?
Yes.
Okay.
This may give us a new perspective
Okay.
of what the Public Utilities Commission goes through. How much money is needed and how's it going to be divided up?
So there's another elephant in the room, right? Okay.
Get me started.
Do you have your direction, everybody? Okay? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.